Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I hope all of you are doing well on this blessed day of Arafat. May Allah accept your dua, accept your fasting, and your other acts of worship, and grant us all forgiveness. Let me start before I introduce my co-host, let me start by noting that today is the funeral service for Congressman John Lewis in Atlanta. It just wrapped up. Many of you may have been watching. We extend our condolences once again to Congressman Lewis's family and to all the residents of the 5th District. May Allah comfort and guide his family and guide us all to benefit from the positive legacy that he leaves behind as we carry on the work of activism and of getting into, as he put it, good trouble, inshallah. And with that, let me introduce someone who is a wonderful activist in her own right, a wonderful leader in her own right, and is also great at getting in good trouble. My co-host, attorney, and executive director of CAIR New York, Afaf Nashr. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Afaf. Welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, my brother Edward. Eid Mubarak to you in advance, and thank you for allowing me to join the program today.
Hamza, always happy to have you with us today, with us on the show, and happy to have you today. Inshallah, why don't you introduce the topic of the program before we welcome our guest on?
Sure. So today, Brother Edward, we're talking about something that we're seeing in headlines from coast to coast, and that is the use of unidentified law enforcement agents going to protest and literally snatching people off of streets. These interactions between these unidentified police officers are extremely frightening because they could be on the federal, state, local level. You don't know who's behind the mask. You don't know. Obviously, they have immense, massive power. And the idea of not being able to identify who's behind that mask also subverts any kind of accountability, any kind of recourse for abuse with law enforcement, which of course is the very reason why people are protesting out in the streets to begin with. So that is our topic today. There's certainly a lot to talk about, and I think we should dive right in and begin. And of course, for our audience, we should note that we'll also be talking about a bit about knowing your rights if you were to encounter a law enforcement agent while you're protesting in the streets, either identified or unidentified.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's remarkable. The idea that this is happening on the streets of America, where this is far from a perfect country, but there are some things I think none of us really expected to see when President Trump was inaugurated 4 years ago. And I expected to see some wild stuff, but the idea that you'd have essentially people acting like stormtroopers, unidentified, unnamed people, grabbing protesters off the streets, engaging in street battles with protesters, it's remarkable. So this has been happening in multiple places, especially in Portland and New York. And we're very happy now to welcome on our special guest today, Brother Simab Husseini, who is the vice chairman of CAIR Oregon, the Oregon chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, and a respected community activist in the state of Oregon. Assalamu alaikum, my brother. How are you?
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm doing fine. Eid Mubarak to everybody, and it's an honor to be on here with both you, Brother Edward, and Sister Afaf.
Thank you so much for joining us. And, it's I don't want to say it's sad, but it is what it is that we have to join to talk about situations like this. But this is the world we live in. It's, there is injustice. And as Muslims, we are here to do what we can, inshallah. And the first step is exposing the injustice, talking about it, educating ourselves about it, and then figuring out what we can do about it. So first, Simab, tell us what in the world is going on in Portland with these unnamed federal officers scooping up protesters, engaging in these street battles. What is happening in Portland?
Well, Portland, there is people who are, as the temperature has been felt across the entire nation, I've called it and determined it as a collective exhale, where, it was the triggering effects of Black deaths and Black lives being lost for just police brutality, no other reason. So we've had a very large collective exhale take place over here for almost 70 days now here in Portland, and in cities in the outskirts of. And Essentially, we've been protesting essentially in front of what they call the Justice Center in downtown Portland. It's been a collective place. At times, it has seen a shift to go in front of the Portland Police Association, which is actually the union for the Portland Police Bureau. At times. And so we've had these shifts in dynamics with our protests. But however, it's been very sustained. It's been a nonviolent movement. It's been restless, but nonviolent. And upon seeing this, I guess we wound up striking a nerve with this administration, this presidential administration, where it was a call to quell protests in Portland may possibly seem like a good idea for them nationally, and it didn't pan out that way. They brought in federal agents and have had them escalate the brutality that police had been subjecting our Portlanders with. And when I say escalate, their munitions have their tactics have been the same as what we've been protesting against our local police. However, their munitions tend to be a little bit more spicy and effective.
Can we get into that, Brother Simaba, just a little bit? What exactly is it looking like for a protester who is encountering federal agents as they're protesting? So when you talk about these interactions, give us some real life examples so that we can really understand what the streets are looking like.
A lot of preparation goes for us trying to be able to make sure that people who go out there are informed and are safe, and that they're practicing forms of safety and preparedness, such as making sure that they're letting people know on the outside where they're going, places that they're going to be, when they plan on leaving, ways to be able to communicate their safety with others that at home or friends or whatnot, just to be able to make sure that there's a connection constantly to someone on the outside, that if this connection is broken, that measures are being taken. Making sure people have the National Lawyers Guild phone number, jail support written on their arm. So a lot kind of goes into being able to make sure that people, while out there, are actually taking these practices. Personally, myself, I have been there much of the protest nights during the almost 70 days. And part of what I've been doing is just making sure that, while we practice forms of whatever safety we can during this pandemic, we're also making sure that we're cognizant of our rights and how to make sure that we're safe and protected, and making sure that people are not escalating a situation when being approached and or apprehended.
Okay. And are all the law enforcement agents unidentified? I mean, is there any kind of is there a differentiation between local and federal officers right now?
So we do know, we are able to differentiate by saying that the ones in a blue versus the ones in camo are the differences between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement. Some of the Border Patrol units have been known to wear some blue with their tactical gear, but upon our escalation and calls from CAIR Oregon, along with partnering organizations that have been working with us, we've managed to be able to get a commitment from our local police to be able to make sure that they're at least wearing a form of their identifying marker individual to an officer, such as a makeshift badge that has their badge number on it present, and or at least being named an officer. And we have seen attempts towards that. We have not seen anything like that take place with federal law enforcement agents or even some of these BORTAC units, which is a combination of U.S. Customs and CBP.
So, Fav, let me ask you, what about New York? Because we've seen reports of something similar, maybe not the same thing or the same situation, but there was video footage of NYPD officers that turned out to be NYPD putting people in an unmarked car. What's going on there with that situation? Any other similar incidents in New York?
Right. So it was pretty scary, Brother Edward. When I first witnessed that video that had gone viral online, essentially what happened is we had a demonstrator who during a time, City Hall, where there was legislation for reforms on the city level were taking place for over an extended period of time as the budget was being put together. And so there were people camping out in City Hall overnight all day. Amongst those was a young woman who allegedly defaced and vandalized some NYPD cam videos. So you know, one of the issues that we have in New York is massive surveillance all the time. And so allegedly this woman had defaced some cameras, and fast forward a week and a half later, 2 weeks later, that sit-in has now been basically terminated. No one's there anymore. She was in another protest, simply walking down. There was no violence. There was nothing out of the ordinary happening. It was a non-violent protest march. And all of a sudden you saw an unidentified minivan with a group of men who were wearing t-shirts and shorts and sneakers. So these are plainclothes officers who jump out of the van and they grab this woman and they're shoving her out of from the street into the van. And she's obviously, you know, obviously disoriented, but also trying to fight back or trying to resist being pushed into this car, whom she doesn't know who it is and what and where this van is going. And then you had various protesters, obviously, who, you know, their attention was grabbed and they started filming and surrounding, and you had a bunch of NYPD officers. That's where you really knew it was NYPD, because then you had other NYPD officers on bikes essentially come in and block off the minivan from the protesters who were videotaping the entire thing as the minivan then sped off. Now, I just want to put this into context. I mean, this was a non-violent offense, and what NYPD ended up saying was that she had an arrest warrant and that this is some sort of unit within the NYPD that often goes in unmarked vehicles to essentially utilize arrest warrants that are out. And so they find these people and they just basically succumb upon them and they take them. But the idea of law enforcement just jumping out of a van, unidentified, as a group of men grabbing a woman off the street, I would say is really a real threat to everyone's security, the security of the officers and the security to citizens, because you don't know whether or not you're being abducted. You don't know if this is a legitimate thing. You don't know if this is a person, you know, in a militia. You have no idea what's happening. And so it's frightening, and it undermines our democracy and our ability as protesters to utilize our rights, obviously, but it also undermines the security in which law enforcement is, you know, says that it's trying to protect through these powers.
And that, I mean, it's remarkable. And as you noted, Afaf, what's so dangerous about this is that if you were walking down the street, right, and some car pulls up alongside you and someone tries to pull you in, you have the legal right in most states, I think every state, to try to defend yourself using force, to defend yourself from being kidnapped. And so if you've got a cop who's trying to do that to you and is not identifying himself as a cop, is not dressed as a cop, is not in a cop car, and you end up fighting with a cop, then, you know, what are they going to say? Well, we had to shoot, we had to do all this and that and that. So it's dangerous for the cop because you're going to fight to save your life in your mind. And then, of course, it's dangerous for you because this cop may then use force against you to subdue you. And it's just a horrible and dangerous situation all around. So with that, go ahead.
And I was just going to say, Brother Edward, and I think everybody here would agree that when I saw that video footage, I felt like I was looking at some sort of regime in some faraway land where, you know, when you try to silence people who are protesting against government action, all of a sudden you're just snatched off of the street. I couldn't believe I was watching something that was happening in our own backyard.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the fact that this was, to my understanding, NYPD, right, and their special unit, you know, that shows you the issue is not just with the Trump administration and the federal government. There is something happening here where you've got a few too many law enforcement agencies, federal or local, who are not following proper procedure, not following the law, not engaging in proper behavior. So it's not just about Trump. There is something wrong in the system here that needs to be addressed through, as you know, we've said over and over again, radical reform. Now,
it's worse than that, Brother Edward, because it's not that they're not following protocol, because the argument here at the NYPD is that they are following procedures, that these officers are actually permitted to use this. kind of tactic, and that's even more dangerous because then you know that it's systemic abuse.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. So, Simab, I guess the next issue that we need to discuss is, what can we, Afaf and I are attorneys, what information can we provide generally to you and other protesters about what to do if you were confronted in this sort of situation? What questions do you have for us that we can answer about how protesters should address this issue for as long as it's happening?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things I would ask, several questions that we do have was, what should protesters do if they come in contact with someone who claims to be an agent, but is not easily identified as one? In our July 15th case, they never even identified themselves, period, until the person was read their Miranda rights in the middle of being in a jail cell for I think over 2 hours.
Yeah, that's insane. So, I mean, let me start by noting that, every state has different laws, and every city has their own laws. So there may be some cities in which, there are requirements upon police officers to say and do certain things during an arrest. There may be permissions granted to people about how to respond if they're being targeted by officers who have not identified themselves. So there are different rules and laws around the country. So we can't really give legal advice to any of you because you're all around the country. What we can say generally, though, is that everyone has the constitutional right to protest peacefully, right? Everyone has the right to engage in lawful assembly. So if you are engaged in a peaceful protest, a lawful assembly, and you are being targeted by someone who does not appear to be a police officer, has not identified themselves as a police officer, and is not using a police vehicle, then obviously you are going to, at the very least, try to demand this person identify who they are. Who are you? Why are you insisting that I come with you? Who are you? Identify yourself. I think that's the first thing that you should do. Number two, if you're in a city in which this is happening, obviously you want to stay close to other people, right? So hopefully if you're at a protest, you've got people who are leading the protest, coordinating, and you're not just, out there willy-nilly with no organization, but follow the lead of the people who are engaging in the protest. So for example, if your protest leader tells you, look, these are police officers, obey, go along, and we'll file the complaint later, then you follow the leadership of the people leading the protest. Those are two quick tips that I can give you right off the bat. Afaf, other thoughts on what people should do if they're confronted in this sort of situation?
Yeah, well, beyond obviously to ask for identification, and the identification should be not just verbal, but potentially, if possible, if there's a business card or any kind of marker or identification, looking at them thoroughly to see if there is anything written. Of course, we're talking about unidentified officers. I think it's important to note, Brother Edward, that because of the different kinds of agencies that have been attending and unfortunately assaulting protesters, I should say, we have a very wide variety of federal, state, and local officers, right? So that means that every agency has different policies and rules that are guiding them. So I know, for example, in DC, where there's protests that are bound to happen this weekend, Attorney General Barr just basically said that, hey, he's got such a wide coalition of law enforcement agencies, from Department of Corrections to other federal agencies, and each one employs its own rules, right? So it's very important to note and to try to take that information even afterwards. So if you are detained and you do find out that it's an agency, make sure that you're keeping up with whatever information you possibly can, because any recourse that could happen afterwards will depend upon your ability to give information to an attorney. The other thing that I'll say, Brother Simab, is that at least in New York City, and there may be available in other places as well, there are right to know acts. So in New York City in 2018, there was a right to know act in which people can demand and officers must give identification. Now, this is only New York City, so it only applies to NYPD. You go further upstate or in other localities where they have their own police forces, it doesn't apply. So you see the degrees and the variations and the hardships that a person can encounter. But your safety is of utmost importance. First and foremost is trying to identify who the person is. Try to be aware of your surroundings, obviously. Go with a buddy, like Brother Edward said. Ask the right questions, and then follow up with information you're capable of ascertaining thereafter.
Absolutely.
And of course, if it does turn out, and we hope that no one encounters this, but if it does turn out to be a law enforcement agent, make sure that you're taking into consideration what rights are given to you. What are they telling you, right? Are your Miranda rights being read to you, for example? Did they inform you of your right to remain silent? And then utilize those rights that are yours constitutionally across the board. Utilize those rights. I always tell people that there's no way President Trump would ever speak to, law enforcement without his team of attorneys. Why should you? Right? Make sure that you utilize your rights, that you actually don't say anything, that you say, I'd like to speak to my attorney. And that's really the only thing that you affirm again and again until an attorney is provided to you.
So does interacting with the federal agent, and we've also had federal agents approach people at their homes now during these protests, does interacting with the federal agent differ when they come to visit people at their homes, differ than actually having to interact with a law enforcement agent locally?
I'll let you take that one first, inshallah.
Sure. I would say, Brother Smab, so obviously what Brother Edward said is right. We have to really take into consideration the details and the jurisdictions and what exactly is happening. And there are different varieties of scenarios, right? So generally speaking, when a federal agent or a local agent of any kind of law enforcement agent comes to your door, unless they have a warrant, a search warrant or an arrest warrant, you don't even have to open the door. Right? This is the advice that we generally give people. If somebody comes knocking on your door, they're a stranger like any other stranger. You don't open up the door for strangers. You simply ask, who is this? And if they identify themselves as an agent, your response should be, please leave your business card in the mailbox or slip it under my door. I'll have an attorney contact you. It's a one-liner, no matter what else they say to you. If they say you're not in any trouble, we want to simply discuss something with you, it's fine. They can say what they want, and you don't need to be disrespectful. All you need to say is, that's fine, agent so-and-so, leave your business card, and I'll be happy to have my attorney contact you. That is the one line. Now, if they do have a search warrant, that means they actually have the right to come in. And what you want to do in the cases of a search warrant is you want to check, number one, that it's signed by a judge. That's really, really important. You have to make sure that because we've known ICE to actually fake search warrants, right, to get people to open the door. So you want to check that it's signed by a judge, and you want to check the date. And if you feel that it's valid, you allow them in, but then you get a copy of that search warrant, and you never ever consent to a search beyond what is in that search warrant. So the example I like to give people is, if it says there's a search warrant for your garage and your garage is detached from your home, you don't let them walk through your home into your garage. Rather, you give them access solely to your garage. Right? And if they are in your home and they happen to look through and there's a bedroom door open and they ask, can we take a quick look? Your answer is no, I don't consent to any search, right? And that's really, really important to say that out loud. So generally speaking, that's the protocol that we give people. And of course, you're going to inform your attorney right away. You're going to take that copy of the search warrant and, again, the business cards of the agencies or whoever's carrying out that search warrant, so that your attorney has the proper recourse thereafter.
Yeah, I agree. Afaf said it all perfectly.
I guess another question would be, what if we're taken in one of these unmarked vans? I mean, granted, our state attorney general has been able to work something out with the vice president in withdrawing the federal agents, but however, the DHS secretary, acting secretary, has signaled that the troops will remain, however, inside the building. So there's still a fear that these patrols can still happen and take place. Again, what if we were taking one of these unmarked vans?
Well, if that happens, let's assume you get to the point where you've actually been detained. You're in a van. So if at that point, you're being detained by law enforcement, right? You figured it out either because they said it, you've seen a badge, or you just know it's law enforcement given the circumstances. Then I think at that point, you need to start trying to memorize as much as you can about what happens. Names, right? Who are you? Who are the people in the van? Who's detaining you? Find out, demand to know where you are being taken, right? You're not going to be in a van for forever, right? When you get there, and they try to book you, again, try to make sure you are demanding to know who the names of the people who detained you. Because what's so dangerous about this is when you have anonymous federal officers detaining you, they take you to the local jail or wherever, or maybe even let you go later. If they're wearing masks and they don't have their names, then you don't know who they are, and that limits our ability as lawyers later to then, have a recourse for you. So I would say the key thing is to remember as much as you can about what happens, and to try to get names from these individuals. You can also tell them you have a lawyer. CAIR has provided little cards you can give to people that have contact information on them. You can either insert a lawyer's name and number. You can use CAIR's information if you're in a state with a CAIR chapter, and tell them, look, I have a lawyer. I want to speak to my lawyer, and demand that right immediately. And you also want to ask, are you being arrested? Because another issue that's happened is you've had these officers detaining people and then letting them go and claiming, oh, well, we never arrested them. We were just detaining them. No, if you grab someone, put them in a car, and don't give them any option in the matter, you are arresting them. And that means that certain constitutional rights are being triggered. So another thing to ask, if someone has put you in a van or trying to put you in a van, am I being arrested? And if not, if you're not being arrested, and if you're not being detained, then you are free to go. So information, I think, is key. Gather information so that we can use it later to try to get a just outcome for you.
And I just want to add that in that situation, obviously, your heart is racing, your mind is racing. Again, safety for yourself has to be of the utmost importance, right? Fighting back or, appearing to resist arrest or making things more difficult can really be problematic in terms of the entirety of the situation. Remember who has the actual power in this situation. That's not to say that you don't have rights, you do, but that's where your power lies. Your power lies in your rights and your ability to assert it. The physical dominance in this situation, of which several officers may be surrounding you, is actually something you need to consider for your own safety. And I hate to say it, but it's the reality of the situation, right? So trying to stay calm, even in a tense situation, and trying to gather that information and not being physical is really important as well.
Yeah.
Good. Well, what about so after, obviously an interaction takes place. What happens after the interaction? What can we do after that?
So I think that's the moment where, don't just let it go and say, oh, whatever, they detained me, it was 10 minutes, I'm free now. Do what the people have done so far, which is let us know about it. I would say immediately, if you can, contact a civil rights attorney. Could be CAIR, could be whatever organization, you're familiar with in your area. I would say after you've done that, try to either write down or maybe even record on video what you retelling what happened to you, right? Well, it's fresh in your mind. Try to tell into your cell phone camera what happened to you, right? And that's beneficial because your memory's fresh, and also you can post that video and we can gain more attention for that incident and expose it, and hopefully expose the people who did it to you.
I would say also just take into account, if they're letting you go and you're leaving a building, you want to know the building, taking the address of the building. If there's any paperwork that's given to you, you want to make sure you hold on to that paperwork so that you can give it to your attorney. Again, business cards, any documentation is really important. And then the other thing that I would also say is, and I know that in an instant information, society that we have, before you post that information, I would actually suggest, and Brother Edward, I don't know if you agree, that you actually speak to an attorney first, especially if you're recounting and retelling the story. You want to make sure that your rights are preserved, and you want to make sure that you don't subvert the strategy that your attorney wants to utilize on your behalf. So share that information first with your attorney.
Right, absolutely. The first step, as we said, is call the attorney first. Then you can record, what you want, but don't publicize it until you've got clearance from your attorney. Right, exactly. Yeah. So, look, it's 3:33, so we're a little over time, but we just want to, highlight to all of you out there who are protesting that this is, this is getting dangerous. I mean, I've been to many protests, and I've never really been afraid for my safety. But this is a different time. Between COVID-19, that's bad enough, right? between the rioting that has happened. I mean, let's be honest. There's been rioting that's happened. There have been vandalism that's happened. So that poses a danger. But the greatest danger, of course, is when you've got militarized police officers, federal, state, or local, who are firing rubber bullets at people's heads, firing tear gas into crowds. This is dangerous stuff. This can kill people and maim people for the rest of their lives. And so we've got to make sure that we understand what our rights are in these situations, that we are protecting ourselves and our fellow protesters, and that we are demanding our political leaders put an end to this nonsense. So we really appreciate the work that you are doing in New York, Afaf, and that you are doing in Portland and Oregon, Simab, and your whole team. So may Allah reward all of you and protect you, and as you carry on this work. Any final thoughts that you want to share for us, Simab, as you before we close out about what's going on in Oregon, or advice you have for the broader Muslim community who are watching this around the country?
Yeah, one of the things that our Muslim community has been mostly concerned of is, wanting to find a way to be proactive, wanting to find a way to actually be part of the protest, and to show their alignment with dissent. And many have been showing up out there in the protests with us, taking rank with the protesters, doing it peacefully, and setting an example for many, as well as being part of the example that has been set and laid by those organizing before us. But for those that are concerned about not being able to make it out there, not being able to go, protesting and dissent happens in many, many different ways. So I would ask for everyone who feels that they're incapable of being able to go out there, don't feel left out. Knowledge is key, knowledge is power, and just making sure that your voice is still heard, and the message that you carry, and when you actually talk about Black Lives Matter and you build a foundation behind that, that actually spreads within your household, within your friendship, within your community in itself, and people become more aware. So I would definitely encourage people to just not feel like they're not part of this actual physical expression of a movement that's happening on a nightly basis that seems like it's going to be continuing for a while, but to continue being informed and gaining that knowledge, and never stopping there.
Brother Edward, if I can just add, I think we'd be really remiss if we didn't just mention civic engagement. Civic engagement, that's another way to make sure that the voice and your concerns and your values and where you lie during this entire epidemic, pandemic, and really just the atrocities that we're seeing unfold before us, that's something that every person can do. And making sure that your elected officials are hearing your voice. This is something you can do in your home, and asking them, taking them into account. What are you doing about this? This is my concern, right? And I want to know, what legislation are you proposing? Why? I want to know what I can bring back to my community, and really pushing our legislators to make sure that reforms are put into place. We're witnessing history unfold before our eyes. And what is going to happen, what we take away from this moment, if we want it to be lasting, long-term impact, will have to be codified in legislation and laws. And that's where our voices, our votes really count. So please be civically engaged and make sure that you do your part in that realm as well, so that the results of what we see is not for nothing, that everything, all the emotions that we've been facing and experiencing actually have a positive, inshallah, with Allah's permission, a positive khair, a positive benefit to society long term.
Ameen. Jazakallah khairan, both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, an early Eid Mubarak to you. May Allah accept your worship, guide us to engage in abundant dhikr today, and to celebrate tomorrow with more dhikr and time with family, inshallah. And we look forward to welcoming CAIR Oregon back onto the show soon, hopefully, inshallah, to discuss more pleasant news, inshallah. So please keep us informed at National as you all carry on your great work, so that we can collaborate with you in the future, inshallah. And Afaf, of course, you as well. You're always welcome on the program.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Edward, to you as well. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for watching today's episode of CAIR on Air, the Muslim Action Hour. Inshallah, we will see you next Tuesday at 3 p.m. for our next episode, inshallah. Until then, Assalamu alaikum. Eid Mubarak.
Eid Mubarak.